Hello everyone, and welcome to space. Today, I'm leading a nation of mushrooms whose sole desire is to destroy the galaxy. By spreading our ideology to our neighbors, genetically modifying their population into the perfect workers, we can build a weapon that will destroy the galaxy and transcend us to a higher plane of existence. Or something like that, I don't really know. For those that don't know what Stellaris is, it's a 4X grand strategy space game where somehow you always end up committing genocide. With that said, before we jump into the game, we had to make our empire. So ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the Shroomian Union. A fanatic, egalitarian, militaristic, burden-carrying group of crusaders. Oh, and for our ideology, I decided to pick Clone Army. Don't worry, I'll explain things a little more in depth as we go along, but the simple premise is, force our ideology on as many empires as possible, and use them to help us blow up the galaxy. Once inside, we were met with our home system. It had a handful of dead planets, 2 stars because we're just that great, and our capital, the Big Shroom. Taking a quick look at our capital, it might be a little overwhelming for anyone that hasn't played this game, but all you need to know is it's a tropical world, and we want more of them. So we sent out our survey ship to explore the neighboring systems, and once they were done, we could send out a construction ship and build an outpost. Above us, we found a large tropical world, another smaller one to the northwest, alongside a large continental world and a savanna world. To help explore a little faster, I thought it'd be a great idea to send out my navy, which discovered a wormhole, which is kinda cool, and then this. Dubbed the Great Wound, it had 3 hostile entities which had significantly more fleet power than me. I tried to escape, but sadly we were too slow, and the clouds destroyed my fleet.
Enemy fleet eradicated.
As they died, we unlocked our first tradition. Now, traditions are unlocked using Unity and allow us to pick from a whole load of different bonuses. Since I planned on going down the warpath, the only logical sense was to pick Supremacy. This would give us a handful of buffs towards our navy and an agenda called a military build-up, which is quite handy considering I just lost mine. To quickly run through the rest of the resources, you have energy, which is like money, minerals for building and making consumer goods for your pops and alloys for military production, food, which is food, trade for trading with the market, influence, which isn't important right now, and a handful of other strategic resources which are used for more advanced buildings and weapons. When I lost my navy to the clouds, it also unlocked a situation where we could send an envoy to investigate what they were. When he arrived, he informed me that they were hostile. Thanks, mate. Why don't you tell that to my Minister of Defense? Oh yeah, that's right. He's dead. Moving on, I colonized the large tropical world to the north. Since it didn't have many districts for basic resources, but plenty of space for city districts, I made it into a factory world. Then we got a pop-up related to our origin. Our shrooms were debating whether our creators were either gods to be worshipped, or slavers who created us for no other purpose than fulfilling their desire for war. This created an archaeology site in our capital, which I assigned a scientist to and would take some time to complete. For now, it was back to exploring the galaxy, where we found and colonized another size 22 tropical world. Yeah, I won't lie, this has been an absolutely amazing start, as there were an additional 9 planets we could colonize. However, we did have one small problem. Because of our origin, the only way our population could grow was via these ancient clone vats. They gave us 2,500 pop per vat, but the biggest handicap was that you can only build 5 of them. So if I wanted to populate the rest of the planets, I needed to acquire another species. Thankfully, a couple of potential contacts popped up, and one even started making monstrous noises at us. So we did the only logical thing, and prepared for war. Oh, and hosted an election where our boy the giant shroom that makes all rules won. Nice. A little while later, we finally deciphered their language, and we were met with a theocratic dictatorship. They immediately closed their borders after I told them they needed to throw away their old ways. So gentlemen, and the 3.3% of ladies that watch this channel, I think we found our first target. While I built up my navy, we had uncovered the truth about our origin. The shrooms were uplifted to fulfill their master's need for war and never to prosper on their own. Now we had 2 choices, either lie and say we were made in the image of our creators, or tell the truth. I picked the latter and was rewarded for our honesty with a small buff. I'd also just finished the Supremacy tree, which unlocked our first Ascension perk. These are powerful buffs that shape your empire in different ways, and eventually will lead us towards becoming the Crisis. But for now, I just picked one vision for the bonus unity. Anyway, fast forward a little bit, we had discovered some more factions, a theocratic oligarchy who were a little more friendly than the dictatorship, and some marauders. I won't lie, I was a little nervous that the two theocracies were going to team up, but you can imagine my delight when the two rivaled each other. Seeing this as the perfect opportunity for war, I rivaled the dictatorship and then spent my entire stockpile of energy paying the marauders to raid them. Thanks to our trusty marauders, they destroyed their navy, which invalidated our rivalry. And it was the perfect time to liberate their workers, with the help of the other theocracy, of course. Normally when you declare war, you usually have to have a reason. For example, you can make claims and then go in and conquer them. But since we were forced to have liberation wars, we had a permanent CB on everyone, which was to impose our ideology. The only downside is, we weren't actually allowed to conquer any territory ourselves. With all their stations destroyed, we just walked through their defenses and arrived at their capital to see the marauders were still bombing them. So naturally, we joined in. While we were softening them up, I had an event called the Rubricator, an alien artifact that was stolen by a pack of thieving rats, which apparently was a curious choice of words as the crew themselves were rats. This revealed a new system that had a relic world with an archaeology site. Relic worlds are incredibly powerful, as they usually come with a handful of buffs and would be a great addition to our empire. Only problem, I couldn't colonize it until I had acquired another species. So for now, I just cracked on with the archaeology site. While I was messing around with all that, I completely forgot I was bombing a capital. With 31% of it devastated and only 2 armies left, I launched our invasion, but little did I know, this was a terrible mistake. Oh god, we're now fighting the marauders! No. They just wiped my navy! Oh no! What do you mean a job well done? They just murdered me! Once I had rebuilt my navy, I liberated the rest of their systems, and the theocratic dictatorship became a commune. They adopted our civics and became democratic crusaders like us. For those wondering what our civics actually do, shared burdens, aside from the roleplay side of things, gives you a unique living standard, which literally makes all your population equal, alongside some other bonuses. And Crusader Spirit gave us some bonus weapon damage and build speed, alongside a buff to all of our commanders, with the only downside being that we can only do liberation wars. Anyway, since I had essentially cloned my empire, normally we would become the best of friends. However, they didn't like me for some reason. To try and solve this issue, I took Shared Destiny as our next ascension perk. This gave us more envoys, which I put on improving relations. They then put all of theirs on damage relations, and thus began some weird battle of diplomacy. And it took me far too long to figure out the reason why they didn't want to be my friend. And it was because I still had close borders with them. Once that little obstacle was overcome, we signed a commercial pact, a research pact, but more importantly a migration treaty, allowing us to colonize planets with their population. To take our friendship one step further with our new commune, I picked diplomacy as our next tradition so we could unlock the Federation technology. But that was going to take some time, so for now it's back to plowing through the Rubricator events and uncovering our origin. To run through it quickly, it was a message from the past from our creators, who were burdened by guilt for uplifting the shrooms into a deadly weapon of war. They gave us 2 choices. Either undo the changes that made us sterile and nerf our species, or unlock our potential, which would make us stronger, but of course we would still rely on the ancient clone vats. Since I had already incorporated another species, I was happy to take clone potential and keep the shrooms as a small but elite population. A couple of months later, we finally found the Rubricator. It was a replicator that can make endless copies of artifacts. However, just as we were about to recover it, a Grand Dragon appeared who killed my scientist and stole the cube for itself. Oh, and to make a bad situation worse, the giant shroom that makes all rules lost the election. Even with my souped up shrooms who got a bonus 35% fire rate and 20% range, I don't think we were going to kill this thing anytime soon. However, it was the perfect time to liberate another theocracy. So we smashed their navy and liberated all their planets until they became a cooperative. With 2 factions liberated, it was time to form our Federation. Now you get a few choices like a Galactic Union, a Martial Alliance, but I was more interested in forming a hegemony. A federation that is built around a powerful empire surrounded by lesser satellite states. To no one's surprise, neither nation was willing to submit. But a little bribery, small gift, changed their mind and the workers' block was formed. As the Federation builds XP and levels up, and we'd receive a handful of buffs. The one we got for now was, members cannot leave without our approval. Sure, we'd freed their workers, but they would only remain free under our guidance. And it was a good thing they were under our protection, as surrounding our block was a horde of ruthless capitalists. I'm not kidding, there were 2 below us and 2 above us. And just like the capitalist scum they were, the 2 below us were at war, which sparked the perfect opportunity for us to roll in and liberate them. So, once again, I bombed the crap out of their capital, sent in the clone armies, and after a few months of clearing out the rest of their systems, they were officially liberated. With access to another species, it was time to talk about gene tailoring. I had picked the cloning tradition, and one of the bonuses gave us a handful of species modification points. Starting with the ones I'd liberated at the start, they were currently on a single alpine world, which I had turned into a strip mine. So I gave them the industrious trait, alongside fertile because why not? Next up were these fellas. They also had the alpine preference, but also had the habitable trait, so they were kind of dotted across my empire. Since my shrooms got a massive bonus towards specialist jobs, I stapled their nerves. Yeah, the plan was for them to work all the simple jobs, which freed up my shrooms to work the more important ones. Moving on, I couldn't help but notice that one of the factions we had liberated had abandoned their ideology. Don't get me wrong, they were still egalitarian militarists, but they had also embraced spiritualism. Since they weren't fanatic egalitarians, they had lost the shared burden civic. This insult could not stand. So I vassalized them, and for the privilege, I made them pay 30% of their basic resource production, which kind of came in clutch as my economy was failing. Because turns out pouring everything into your military production isn't a sustainable economic policy. Shortly after, we had the opportunity to join the Galactic community. Immediately, I pushed for the Galactic market to be formed and started pouring influence into nominating my capital as the hub. I didn't really expect to win, but I was a little insulted when the winner was someone who was currently being bombed. Frustrated, I tried to kill the Grand Dragon that had cucked us earlier. With 3 separate fleets, we fucking annihilated it. Its death gave us the Rubricator, which had both a nice passive and an active that produced us 500 minor artifacts. You may notice we had a couple of other relics, the first being the Blade of the Huntress and the Psionic Archive. Feeling incredibly overconfident, I felt it was time for a little expansion. Looking south, we had a robotic, xenophobic isolationist, who I felt needed a little bit of liberation. Initially, the war went well, as we secured everything north of Last Fort. But it turns out this is some kind of holy system for a fallen empire. And me being me, told them to fuck off. Yeah, it turns out that was a really bad idea, and they destroyed my fleet. And I signed a white peace shortly after with the robots. On the topic of fallen empires, we had a holy guardian in the north that was currently cucking us out of a few Gaia worlds. Fallen empires, for those that don't know, are extremely powerful factions with endgame technology that have become stagnant. They don't really do anything unless you piss them off or they wake up. I'll be honest, one of my biggest problems was that my military sucked. My technology sucked, my design sucked, and the only thing that was carrying us were our commanders. But it's okay because I had one of those great ideas, and that was to kill the marauders. Right now, I had just kind of gone around them and left them to do their own thing. However, if I wanted some better mil tech, they needed to die. Now these systems are pretty well fortified, and it took a couple of attempts for us to defeat them. Once they were defeated, I could send in the science ship to analyze the debris, and this gave us some new technologies that I could research. Of course, to research them in a sensible amount of time, we needed some better research output. However, to upgrade our labs, we needed exotic gases, something I was severely lacking until I colonized the continental world. It had 2 unique features that allowed farmers to produce gases. So of course, I invested heavily into turning this planet into a farming world, and by the end of the game, it was producing over 3,000 food, but more importantly, 433 exotic gases. With some shiny new technology and another tradition completed, it was finally time to pick Galactic Nemesis. Unlocking it gave us another menu to look at. Over here, we had our Menace objectives, which are things we had to do to level up our crisis. Right now, we were level 1, and this gave us additional pop purge speed and a buff towards subjugation acceptance, which gave me an idea. All our little friends we had imposed our ideology on had finally lost their recently liberated buff. However, because they were in our federation, they got another one. So to remedy this situation, I kicked them out. Alone, they could either rejoin as my vassal and pay me 30% of their basic income for the privilege, or be destroyed by the capitalist scum, or the fanatic purifying peacocks who were currently consuming the South. Next on the list of things to do was to kill void worms. Turns out there was some kind of plague causing them to go crazy, so I began to find a cure and beat up any that stumbled into my empire. They were pouring out of this wormhole, so I parked my navy next to it until I had built a star fortress. With that wrapped up, we had leveled up in the crisis, giving us a few more buffs, which included the ability to build a medicine corvette, which I think is like a slightly better corvette that requires minerals instead of alloys, bonus damage versus star bases, plus a war exhaustion gain of minus 75%, allowing us to essentially perma-war people. So I think it was time for another war in the South. This time, instead of using the imposed ideology war goal, we had one called Wipe Them Out. Instead of occupying their systems, we just destroyed them. As you can probably guess, this worked quite well until we arrived at Last Fort. But with my much bigger fleet, this time the Fallen Empire didn't cause any issues and let us pass. This allowed us to reach their planets, and I immediately began a terror bombing campaign until my clone armies arrived, and thus began a battle between the clones and the robots. I have to admit, this war dragged on for so long, the Fallen Empire declared war on me. Those hive bastards with their 700k fleet power decided they wanted to fuck me. Yeah, there wasn't really a lot I could do about that, so I surrendered. Since this was a humiliation war, we received an empire-wide debuff and our faction leader was executed. To replace him, we held an election. And I bet you can't guess who was top of the polls. That's right, our boy, the giant shroom that makes all rules. Long live the giant shroom that makes all the rules. He's so back. Anyway, the war continued for a little longer until I got bored and eventually signed a truce. Did we technically win the war? Nah, not really. I murdered a ton of their pops with the Armageddon bombardment stance and carved out a small chunk of their empire, but one of my vassals did kind of stop existing. On a positive note, this war generated us a lot of menace, and we pushed our crisis level up to level 4. Which, I'll be honest, wasn't the best of ideas because the Holy Guardians declared war on us. But that's okay, we could probably fight them as long as...
Oppressors have declared war against us.
Yeah, that's not good. In the north, we had a 507k fleet walking through our territory, and in the south, just a casual 740k. Our fleet numbers compared to the Holy Guardians were relatively close thanks to our Federation fleet, but I wanted to make sure we'd win. I picked Galactic Contender, which would give us a damage buff against fallen empires. And when we finally met them in battle, we absolutely railed them. They immediately signed a white peace with us, allowing us to focus on the south. But after looking at their fleet of 750k, I decided that maybe surrender wasn't such a bad idea. Once again, we were humiliated, and sadly our boy, the giant shroom that makes all rules, was executed. His sacrifice would not be forgotten, as you may think that these wars were pointless. Well, that's where you're wrong. Because we killed the Holy Guardians fleet, we were able to analyze the debris, giving us access to their technology. And oh boy did we need it, because once we hit level 5, the entire galaxy declared war on us. Reaching the final phase of the crisis allowed us to start the construction of something called a... engine. Basically, this was our weapon to destroy the galaxy, but it required a ton of dark matter to build each phase. To get dark matter, we could either mine it, buy it from the galactic market, which I find kind of funny because it means someone is out there actively funding the destruction of the galaxy. And finally, we had these cubes of doom. These would allow me to crack stars, and each one we cracked would give us 2000 dark matter. I did, however, have a small problem. My Federation disappeared, and with that, my 364k Federation fleet. Not exactly ideal when we were at war with the entire galaxy, but I'm sure we'll be fine. In fact, it was a perfect time to start a new offensive into the Holy Guardians. I took over a handful of their systems, but there was no way we were taking their capital. During our invasion, the Southern Empire had pushed us all the way back to our Star Fortress. I had planned to hold them here while I pushed in the north, and it became a race between me stacking defenses and the AI stacking more fleets. I have to admit, things were going well. I was able to crack a large amount of stars and get a nice stockpile of dark matter. Over time, we completed the first 2 phases, but then it happened. The South launched their attack. Now, this was a massive battle, and my poor defenses did not stand a chance. After making a tactical retreat, they made the mistake of splitting their navy and tried to chase down one of mine, where they got absolutely wrecked. With the main chunk of their armada dead, I was able to reclaim our systems and even push them all the way back. Along the way, I cracked each star, and you'll be pleased to know, I even cracked last fort. At this point, I had destroyed around a quarter of the galaxy. There were so many dead systems, and I had managed to accumulate all the dark matter that I needed. When the final phase of construction was almost complete, the galaxy tried one last desperate attempt to push us in the north, but the poor bastards were massacred. We lost a total of 4 ships to their nearly 500, and with that, it was time to say goodbye to the galaxy. With the engine completed, we could destroy the galaxy and erase all life. Why? I don't really know. Something about the energy will ascend us to a higher plane of existence or something. Was it worth it? I don't know. Maybe. With all life dead and the galaxy just filled with empty black holes, I think our mission was accomplished. Anyway, I just want to say a massive thank you all for watching. Thank you to the people who throw money at me, and if you enjoyed, please leave a like. This will probably be my last video of the year, so I hope everyone has a good Christmas and New Year's, and I'll see you next year for new videos every